really appreciate it. So I am a mom. I'm a wife. I'm married to Jeff is my husband, and I have two grown kids, Rachel, who's 25, and Jonathan, who is 28. And we are soon to have another daughter. My son is engaged to the lovely Rose Schrott. So we hope to have a wedding and a simcha in October. So thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here this morning for this important Shabbat. And I stand before you today as a mom, a wife, a Baltimorean, as a Jewish woman, and as one of the 15 women of the Senate of Maryland. So nearly 1 year ago today, as Sandy said, after having served in the House for 5 years, I was appointed to the Senate. It seems particularly appropriate today that you've invited me during Sisterhood Shabbat on Shushan Purim to talk about women in politics, for I view Purim, at least through today's lens, as a celebration of women's strength and power, Vashti in her unwillingness to perform for the king, and Esther for her bravery in revealing herself as a Jewess and saving the Jewish people from the evil Haman. I posted something yesterday about Purim on my Facebook page, and someone posted the most brilliant GIF, a Queen Esther flexing her muscle like the World War II Rosie the Riveter, let's get the job done posters with the words flashing, women getting the job done since 460 BCE. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about why it matters that there are women in office. And then I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experience being a woman in what is still a male-dominated world. First, let's acknowledge that things are changing. Not fast enough, not as fast as I would like, but they are changing. Here in Maryland, 40% of the folks who represent us in the state legislature are women. Not representative of the full population, but significant, and it has grown in recent years. But not so much in other state legislatures, except in Nevada, which in 2019 became the first and only majority female legislature in the country. And since women became the majority in Nevada, they passed policies mandating paid sick leave, boosted the minimum wage, put an equal rights amendment on the ballot, and made sure that breast, uterine, and cervical cancer were included in a law that provides compensation to firefighters who develop cancer in the job. 6 states saw double-digit increases in the number of women serving in the state legislature from 2015 to 2020. But that's tempered by the reality that nearly twice as many states saw the number of women in state legislatures decline or stay the same. This year, women's share of state legislative seats is about 33%. And let's not forget the 114 women now serving in Congress. Still not enough, but more. In Maryland, 61 out of the 141 members of the House of Delegates are women. That's 43%. And in the Senate, 15 out of 47 of us are women, 32%. But we've gone backwards with regard to statewide representation. We have no statewide elected woman in Maryland and no woman representing us in Congress. Nancy Kopp, our wonderful, who happens to be a Jewish woman also, is our state treasurer, and she serves in a statewide role, but she's appointed by the legislature. So why is it important to pay attention to this data? And why is it important to have women in elected office at all? First, I think it's really important to have the people who are making the laws reflect the people they're making the laws for, reflecting the community. Part of our job as elected officials is to address problems, to make government work better for people, all people, and to fix systems that are broken. Our elected bodies should reflect the fullest diversity of our community so that we're in tune with the lived realities of each of those communities as well. I'll give you a few examples. For many years, the standard protocol in scientific research for a long time was men and white men. A focus on health problems didn't direct funds on examining the unique needs of women's health. And it's only fairly recent, a recent phenomenon that NIH studies, for example, look at both genders. And we're still playing catch up in this area. You need look no further than the disparate impact COVID-19 is having on different people, especially the Black and Latinx communities. Another example, when they created the spacesuit, and as an aside, my dad actually worked on the original spacesuit for NASA, and a little known fact, that's why I was born in Houston, Texas. Anyway, for whom was it designed? It was designed for men. There weren't any women astronauts then, and it wasn't until many, many years later that they had to construct a spacesuit to reflect the differences in women's bodies. So what is it like to be a woman in politics these days? First, let me say that there are really two skill sets that one has to become an elected official, and they're not necessarily overlapping. First, you have to get elected. You have to run a campaign, which entails one, thinking of running and thinking of oneself as a candidate. And we know it takes multiple times, usually of being asked, for women to decide to run for office. Men don't seem to have that problem. They just seem to say, I'll run for office. Two, it takes money, and it's more challenging for women to raise money. We generally make less from the get-go, and we have fewer contacts and connections to the worlds of power and privilege where there are the networks of support for candidates. There are certainly more barriers, but those are just the biggest two. Similar challenges exist once elected. And there are times when I look around and realize that I'm the only woman in the room. And it happened just last week. I'll give you an example. I have been appointed by the president of the Senate to be one of 4 people to work with the Department of Housing and Community Development. You may have heard that the state is going to get just over $400 million in rental assistance to help people in COVID. And I'm part of a small group of people that's going to help the department and the Department of Management and Budget decide how to spend that money. And in this meeting last Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I looked around on my Zoom room and realized I was the only woman in the office on the screen. Another example, and these are just from this week, one that a colleague shared with me. She had to explain to a middle-aged white man, a colleague, one with many daughters, I might add, why it might be embarrassing for a middle school or a high school girl to have to ask her teacher to go to the nurse for menstrual products. This committee was considering a bill to make accessible menstrual products in at least 1 or 2 bathrooms in middle and high schools. No, it's not cheap, and that seemed to be the main complaint of the colleague. But she pointed out that toilet paper is also expensive, and somehow we've deemed it important enough to pay for. Second, I'm one of 3 women on my committee of 11. I serve on the Judicial Proceedings Committee that deals with domestic violence, crime, abuse, many other issues that are really difficult issues. And we actually considered a bill to make it against the law for a law enforcement officer to prohibit a law enforcement officer from engaging in certain sexual acts with a victim or a witness or someone involved in investigation. It's a bit broader than that, but really, we need a law for this? And the answer is yes. When we considered the Relief Act that we passed a few years ago to provide direct aid into individuals' hands and small businesses' hands who have been hurt by the coronavirus, it's really important to keep in mind that the disparate impact this disease and crisis is having on women. So many women are leaving the workforce, forced to choose between their work and their families and juggling kids and their crazy school schedules during these really difficult days of distance learning and balancing the new realities of COVID under which we're all struggling. Workers who are suffering at a greater degree today, those in hospitality and service, are disproportionately women, and they're at the lower end of the wage scale. So it's really important to keep that in mind when we consider things like raising the minimum wage and providing protections for essential workers. Another example, I've been a little frustrated recently in my committee that, as I said, is dominated by a few large voices who like to share their wisdom with others. And a few times I've spoken up recently, and there have been a few times where I just don't feel like I'm being heard. So the other night, I actually said in committee, when I got no response after I had said something, did anyone actually listen to what I just said? And it's not at all unusual for women generally to have their ideas restated by the men who suddenly tune in and listen as if what you said wasn't said at all. I have to say that hasn't happened to me too often, just recently. And a few weeks ago, I had a very long hearing about a contentious issue I'm proposing, a bill that we're considering, that would enable victims of child sex abuse to hold their abusers accountable many years after the fact. We know that the average age for victims of this horrendous crime, if they make public their experience, is the age of 52. 52. And our laws right now do not enable a survivor to bring civil charges against someone or an institution that may have enabled that abuser for that length of time. And we have a statute of limitations that my bill would remove. Anyway, it was a long, emotional, and very difficult hearing at which I presented the bill and had a panel of witnesses where the experts that I presented were also women. And after the hearing, I sent a link of it to my family with a few of the highlights or lowlights identified for them to watch. It was over a 2-hour hearing. And my 25-year-old daughter told me recently that she's watched the whole hearing a few times and was just stunned and astounded at the misogyny in it. There was a lot of mansplaining, and there was just an air of dismissiveness that I acknowledge I'm not a lawyer in this land of lawyers that I'm existing in, but neither are some of my new male colleagues. And I can't quite imagine that those male colleagues would have been treated as I was. One of the biggest differences I recognize in moving to the Senate was the dearth of other women colleagues. And I feel the difference being 1 out of 15 in a body of 47 compared to being 1 out of 61 in a larger environment. In the House, the chair of the Appropriations Committee on which I served was a woman. My original subcommittee chair, who's now the Speaker of the House, the first woman and first African-American speaker to hold that position, is a woman. And I was surrounded by women colleagues in leadership position, not so much in the Senate. Having said all of that, I love serving in the Senate and working to break the barriers that continue to exist for too many of us. I stand on the shoulders of so many women who have come before, like Paula Hollinger, for example, who were successful in changing the workplace by creating a 40-hour work week, making the workplace safer, ending child labor, pushing for fair pay, expanding access to family reproductive services, and I'm proud to continue in their path. What we've seen over these past few years is the power of women and what we can do when we flex our collective muscle. We can make changes in our pay, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our streets, in our health care, in our politics, and in our culture. So I ask you this morning, whether you're in heels or tennis shoes, a dress or a uniform, as in the words of Senator Barbara Mikulski, put on your lipstick, let's square our shoulders, suit up, and get to work. Whether you want to run for office or to make your voice heard, the importance of which cannot be underestimated, please join me in being involved, just like Queen Esther so many years before us, to fight for our community. Thank you so much for having me this morning, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Shelly, very much. This was very, very informative and very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Shelly, I also want to thank you for being here and thank you for the work you've done in the past and that you're still doing to fight for the women of Maryland. And Yasher Koach on today's inspiring and informative talk. And also congratulations, Mazel Tov, on your son's engagement. You don't look quite old enough and you know what comes next.
Please, all in good time. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It was an honor having you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Our service continues on page 184 with the Hatzi Kaddish, which Doris will lead.
Sure. Yikadav Yikadash and Be Rabba, Yamadi Rakirute, Yamlich Malchute, Vachayechon of Yomechon, Vachayedechon Beit Yisrael, Vagalav Izman Karive Imaru, Amen. Yeheshme Rabba Mavarach, Le'alamu Ame Amaya, Yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yirman v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei kedusha v'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata v'shvachata v'nechabata v'amiran v'yobah v'maru. Amen.
Amen. We now continue with the Musaf Amida on page 185.